Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're focusing on something that feels, well, pretty urgent. It's this question of whether American economic policy is going through a fundamental change. We've got a whole stack of sources here, articles, papers, opinion pieces from all over the place, ideologically speaking.
And they're all analyzing these very specific government actions that have been happening recently.
Exactly. And the consensus from a lot of the critics is that these actions are blurring the lines, between private companies and state control.
Right. We're seeing labels like state capitalism being thrown around.
And even a hybrid between socialism and capitalism, which is pretty strong language.
It is.
So our mission today is to figure out what that analysis actually means. I mean, the most striking claim we found was in the Wall Street Journal, their chief economics commentator.
I saw that one.
Yeah. He says current policies are a type of state capitalism where, and this is a quote, the state guides the decisions of nominally private enterprises.
And he didn't stop there.
No. He described the whole method as imitating the Chinese Communist Party.
Which is about as charged as a comparison gets.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What are the specific things the government is doing that makes these sources use that kind of language? And how are these, old economic warnings coming back into the conversation?
Well, that's the perfect place to start because the definitions are really the battleground here.
Okay.
When you hear critics use a term like state capitalism, they're being very deliberate. They're trying to distinguish it from, say, traditional socialism.
Right, socialism being where the state just owns everything, the factories, the banks.
Exactly. And that is clearly not what's happening in the U.S. What these sources are describing is something the economist Ludwig von Mises talked about way back in the 40s. He called it interventionism.
Interventionism.
Yeah. For him, there was no stable middle-of-the-road path. Interventionism wasn't a sustainable system. It was a hampered market economy.
A hampered market. I like that term.
It's a hybrid where the market is still there, but it's constantly being pushed around, coerced, subsidized, directed by the state. It's not eliminated, but it's definitely not free.
So it's not the end of capitalism, but the state is becoming this sort of controlling partner in key industries. And the sources bring up these really heavy historical critiques. Hayek, Mises. Do those warnings from 80 years ago still apply today?
The critics we read argue that they are profoundly relevant.
How so?
Because interventionism, as Mises saw it, has this internal logic that just forces the state to grab more and more control. Think about Hayek's The Road to Serfdom from 1944.
A classic.
He argued that once the state decides it must have a certain outcome, let's say guaranteed production of computer chips, it can't just hope the market provides it. It has to step in and deepen its control again and again.
And I saw another one mention Roy A. Childs Jr. in 1982.
Yes, and his warning was so specific. He basically predicted a uniquely American path, an authoritarian populist movement that was hostile to free markets and wanted a managed nationalist economy.
And the sources are saying that recent political movements from both sides are sort of fulfilling that prophecy.
That's the argument they're making.
Okay, so that's the philosophical background. Let's get into the recent political context. The sources say this isn't just one administration.
No, it spans across them, but the approach is different. President Biden has used these huge pieces of legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, to basically structure entire industries.
With massive subsidies and tax credits.
Huge subsidies, all justified under the language of national security. It's very powerful industrial policy.
But the sources also point out that the Trump administration really pioneered a bolder, more direct approach.
That's right. It was more about direct transactional control. And that's what really triggered this state capitalism critique, because it involved the government literally taking a stake in private companies.
Okay, this is where it gets really detailed and, to be honest, pretty wild. Let's dig into these specific examples of what critics are calling de facto nationalization.
Let's do it.
Okay, first up, the attempted acquisition of U.S. Steel by Nippon Steel, $14.9 billion. The sources say that to get approval, the administration secured something called a golden share. For anyone listening who might not know, what does having a golden share actually let the government do?
It's a powerful name, and it's a powerful tool. The sources confirmed that this golden share gives the U.S. administration veto power over major corporate decisions.
Veto power.
Yes. So this isn't just a one-time regulatory review. It's a permanent seat at the table. It gives the government a controlling voice in the company's strategic direction, even if it owns almost no actual stock.
So the government could, what, block a merger, tell them where to build a factory?
Potentially, yes. It could dictate whether U.S. Steel accepts certain deals, makes certain investments. The line between being a guide and being a controller gets incredibly thin.
And it's not just old school industries like steel. We saw this with MP Materials, the rare earth minerals company.
Right. The Department of Defense spent $400 million of taxpayer money
400 million.
to buy a 15% stake in the company. In that deal, the government is now the single largest shareholder.
Which means they're not just at the table, they're at the head of the table.
You could certainly argue that. Their voice is the most influential one in the boardroom.
But the example that really set off alarms, the one that led directly to that de facto nationalization label, was the Intel deal.
The one tied to the CHIPS Act.
Yes. Can you walk us through the mechanics of that one?
Sure. So Intel was awarded a huge grant, $8.5 billion under the CHIPS Act. But here's the condition. In exchange for that money, the government would get warrants.
Warrants, meaning the right to buy stock.
The right to buy 10% of Intel stock.
A 10% stake in Intel. I mean, given how critical semiconductors are, why did the Wall Street Journal's editorial board immediately call that a de facto nationalization?
Because, the sources argue, when you condition $8.5 billion in federal money on getting stock in return, it's no longer a subsidy.
It's an investment.
It's a government equity investment. Walter Isaacson is quoted in the sources saying, "This is exactly what state capitalism looks like. The government interfering in corporate decisions by becoming a major owner."
And that's where the socialism language really comes in.
It is. Senator Rand Paul's warning was everywhere. Today it's Intel. Tomorrow it could be any industry. Socialism is literally government control of the means of production.
The argument being that financial control gets you to the same place as outright ownership.
The same coercive end result, exactly.
Okay, that sets up the second major tool we're seeing. Not just taking a stake, but this purely transactional use of power. Critics are linking this to crony capitalism.
Or even extortion.
We're moving from government as a shareholder to government as a revenue partner.
And this specific case involves exporting AI chips to China, which is obviously a huge national security issue. The administration allowed NVIDIA and AMD to sell certain chips to Chinese buyers, but with a shocking condition.
Which was,
The companies had to pay the federal government 15% of the revenue they made from those sales.
wait, hold on. Not profit, revenue. They had to give the government 15% off the top just for the license to sell their own product.
That's what the sources report, and that is the core of the critique. It's unprecedented.
I mean, how does that even work? That completely changes the financial model for a company.
It does. And the reaction from some of these conservative sources was intense. National Review called it extortion and a lurch toward state-directed capitalism.
Because it's not a market rule, it's just a deal made by a bureaucrat.
Precisely. Clark Packard from the Cato Institute argued there seems to be no statutory basis for this. I mean, where does the government get the authority to demand a revenue share?
He said the whole thing.
Reeks of more crony capitalism, his words, suggesting the state's power is being used for political or financial gain, not for the market's benefit.
And this really gets to the lack of a coherent philosophy here. The sources note that when the former president was challenged on this, he basically just said he'd make deals like that for our country all day long.
Right. It seems to be driven by instinct. A kind of transactional nationalism, not a fixed economic doctrine.
And that combination of deal-making and direct financial stakes, it all feeds back into this broader critique of soft tyranny.
It does. It directly echoes that 1982 warning from Childs Jr. about an authoritarian populist movement.
The sources list out these really specific examples that critics see as the government trying to enforce compliance, using public pressure and humiliation.
Exactly. The concern isn't just policy disagreement, it's the signaling effect. You have demands for CEOs to resign, public shaming of executives at huge firms, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Apple, Walmart.
Often on social media.
Right. And it's seen as a way to signal government displeasure or to force a company to make a specific hiring or investment decision.
That's the soft part of the tyranny.
It is. When the government publicly humiliates a CEO, the message to every other company is crystal clear. Align your goals with our political needs, or you could be next.
And this pressure wasn't just on private companies. The sources point to pressure on government agencies that are supposed to be independent.
Absolutely. The pressure on the Federal Reserve, the firing of the Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner after claims jobs data were rigged.
Right.
Critics argue those actions signal that even fundamental economic data has to align with political goals, which is a hallmark of state-directed economies.
This brings us right back to Mises. Given this whole cycle, subsidies, control, pressure, why was he so sure that this kind of interventionism is doomed to failure?
Well, Mises saw the market as this incredibly complex interconnected system. When the government steps in to control just one part of it, say by setting a price ceiling on milk or blocking a chip export, it doesn't stabilize things. It creates a distortion,
An imbalance.
a huge imbalance. Let's say the government heavily subsidizes solar panels, but doesn't control the price of silver needed to make them. The demand for panels skyrockets, the supply of silver can't keep up, and you get a massive shortage.
So the intervention actually creates the opposite of what you wanted. It leads to chaos.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is the fatal political cycle Mises described. When that chaos happens, the government has two choices. It can admit the intervention failed and pull back,
Which politicians rarely do.
or it can intervene again, but deeper and more broadly, to try and fix the new problem it created.
So they start rationing silver or controlling production.
Exactly. And that, Mises said, is the unavoidable path. This constant expansion of state power is how you get socialism by installments.
So let's tie this all together. We started with that really controversial claim that U.S. policy is imitating the Chinese Communist Party. Is that just political hyperbole, or is there a real functional similarity here?
The sources argue the similarity is in the mechanism of control, not the ideology. The U.S. still has democratic institutions and private property.
Why, of course.
But the functional similarity is this idea of centralized industrial planning. In China's model, the party sets a national goal dominant in AI, let's say,
Okay.
and then it uses all its power to force supposedly private firms like Huawei to pursue that goal.
Okay.
So when the U.S. government uses billions in grants to dictate Intel's strategy or a golden share
Yeah.
to veto decisions at U.S. Steel, critics are saying the method of top-down control starts to look very similar, regardless of who's doing it.
And the warning is that this process is speeding up. The sources suggest that now that there's a precedent for this in chips and steel,
Under the banner of national security.
lawmakers will start to argue that, well, food and medicine are as well, and push for even more government ownership across the whole economy.
That's the trajectory they fear. And it gets to the core ideological argument here. The sources conclude that these policies are a betrayal of what they see as America's founding principles: liberty, private property, the right to do business without constant government deal-making.
And if those ideals are abandoned, the sources warn, this kind of state capitalism won't make America great again. It will make the American economy unrecognizable.
It's a stark warning.
It really is. We've seen a very detailed argument that the U.S. is adopting methods of economic control that have historically been associated with managed economies, and it's being driven by transactional politics.
And that really leads to the final provocative question that these sources leave you with. In an age of intense global competition, where do you draw the ethical and economic line?
Right.
Can the U.S. maintain its principles of liberty while also ensuring national security by controlling key industries through these methods?
Where does necessary industrial policy end and the road to serfdom begin? We'll leave you with that. We encourage you to explore the source material for yourself. Until next time, keep digging deeper.